In 1963, Soviet scientists opened the tomb of Ivan IV in Moscow's Archangel Cathedral and discovered something that would rewrite everything historians thought they knew about Russia's most infamous ruler. The bones contained arsenic and mercury at levels far beyond natural occurrence. Not just Ivan's bones, his wife's remains told an even darker story.
Where did you hide
Marfa
the treasure?
Sobakina's skeleton showed concentrations consistent with aggressive poisoning over 2 weeks. Anastasia Romanova's hair contained arsenic, suggesting repeated doses over years. When forensic teams re-examined the evidence in 2004 with modern
He
equipment,
is not who you
the
think he
conclusion
is, and
was
if you say a
inescapable.
word, they will kill
Ivan
us
the Terrible
both.
wasn't just killing his wives. He was conducting systematic experiments in slow-motion murder. Between 1,547 and 1,584, Ivan married at least 7 times, possibly 8. Every single marriage ended with the woman dead,
Remember your
vanished,
place, girl.
or imprisoned in
Your
a convent
duty is to
where she
us,
would
not
spend
your
decades in a
desires.
cell so
Do
small
exactly
she
as
couldn't
you are
extend her
told.
arms. The pattern was so consistent that modern psychologists analyzing the historical records have concluded Ivan created the first documented system of institutionalized intimate partner violence, a machinery of destruction that combined bribe, selection protocols, psychological torture, chemical poisoning, and political terror into something resembling industrial-scale femicide. But here's what makes this story different from typical historical brutality. Ivan didn't hide what he was doing. He documented it. Court records survived, describing the bride shows that gathered 2,000 young women for inspection like livestock. Medical texts preserved the invasive examinations candidates underwent. Servant accounts detailed the progressive isolation and abuse each wife endured. Oprichnina files the records of Ivan's secret police, cataloged what happened to noble women whose husbands fell under suspicion. The evidence exists because Ivan's system was so normalized, so accepted as proper governance, that officials recorded procedures we would recognize as torture with the clinical precision of accountants tallying grain shipments. The underground chamber beneath the Alexandrov Kremlin still exists. Tourists don't visit it because Russian authorities have deemed it structurally unsafe. But the real reason is that the space carries energy that disturbs even hardened historians who've examined it. The stone walls still show iron rings where chains were anchored. Chemical analysis of residue on the floor identified mercury, arsenic, and organic compounds consistent with prolonged human confinement. This wasn't a dungeon for quick executions. This was a laboratory where Ivan tested how much suffering a human body could endure before breaking completely. Marfa Sobakina hung in those chains in late October 1571. She was 19 years old, had been Tsarina of all Russia for exactly 12 days, and the poison coursing through her veins had been administered on her husband's direct orders. She would be dead within 3 days. Her family would be executed within weeks. And Ivan would use her death as justification for a wave of terror that killed tens of thousands, claiming that witchcraft had stolen his beloved bride and that conspirators must be rooted out and destroyed. The bride shows represented psychological warfare disguised as romance. When the Tsar required a wife, messengers rode to every province, commanding noble families to present eligible daughters for inspection. Refusal wasn't legally forbidden, it was simply fatal. Families who declined marked themselves as having something to hide, or considering themselves above the Tsar's requirements. Either interpretation could trigger investigations by the Oprichnina, Ivan's black-robed enforcers who had sworn
Lower your
oaths superseding
eyes,
all
eyes,
obligations to God,
listen
family,
closely.
or humanity. For Ivan's third bride show in 1571, over 2,000 young women were gathered in Moscow. They came from wealthy boyar families and minor provincial nobles, from established dynasties and families barely above merchant class. Regional officials conducted preliminary screenings using documented criteria, age 15 to 23, specific height and weight ranges, skin clear of blemishes, hair thick and lustrous, teeth uncorrupted, bearing dignified but not proud, voice pleasing but not shrill, movements graceful but not theatrical. Beyond physical specifications, investigators examined family histories for scandal or disloyalty, interrogated servants about temperament and habits, questioned priests about confession patterns looking for problematic sins. 70% were eliminated at regional level. The remaining 600 were transported to Moscow for examinations conducted by teams of physicians, priests, and female attendants who reported every word and action to selection committees. The examinations were thorough in ways that surviving medical texts describe with clinical precision. Physicians assessed not merely visible attributes, but internal health, using procedures that
Our
modern
Father, who
gynecologists
art in
recognize
heaven,
as invasive
hallowed
and
be thy
potentially
name.
traumatic.
Thy
Psychological
kingdom come,
evaluations
thy
tested
will be
reactions to
done.
deliberate provocations, staged conflicts, false news about sick family members, manufactured scandals to assess emotional stability. Women who showed too much reaction were marked as unstable. Too little reaction meant cold or calculating. The ideal response was genuine but restrained distress, followed by composed acceptance of whatever the Tsar's servants told her. The surviving records read like quality control assessments in manufacturing. Candidate 43, exceptional physical specifications. Behavioral profile indicates pliability and eagerness to please. Family connections minimal. Recommendation, advance as primary candidate. The candidates were kept in deliberate uncertainty, never knowing if they would be selected, sent home, or simply disappeared. This uncertainty was itself a test. Women who crumbled under the pressure were eliminated. Those who maintained composure demonstrated the stability the Tsar required. When Marfa Sobakina advanced to the final round, where Ivan personally examined the last 100 candidates, she had already learned the first lesson. She existed entirely at his pleasure, and his pleasure was unpredictable, demanding, and potentially deadly. Ivan walked among the final candidates, asking questions designed to provoke rather than gather information. Your grandmother was Tatar. How much pagan blood runs in your veins? Your father spoke with Lithuanians. Would you spy for him if I gave you position? My last wife died screaming in childbirth. Are you prepared to scream for me? These had no right answers. Candidates could only respond and hope their responses didn't trigger whatever dark currents moved through the Tsar's mind. When Marfa was selected, her father wept with joy. Her mother sewed wedding garments with trembling hands. The entire Sobakina family rose from minor nobility to the inner circle of power in one afternoon. They had no idea they'd just won a death sentence. The preparation began immediately after selection. Marfa was moved to a designated section of the Kremlin, separated from her family, surrounded by attendants who answered to Ivan rather than to her. She would not see her parents again until the wedding, and after the wedding, only under supervised conditions, making genuine communication impossible. The physical preparation involved repeated bathing with herb-infused waters that physicians claimed would purify her body and enhance fertility. Female attendants examined her closely during these baths, documenting every detail for royal archives. Her hair was treated with oils, skin with preparations to create appropriate glow, teeth cleaned with abrasive mixtures applied directly. But preparation extended beyond cosmetics to what documents call medical examination to ensure readiness for marital duties. Procedures involving physicians specializing in women's health and midwives described with enough clinical detail that modern historians recognize them as invasive, degrading, and designed primarily to establish dominance rather than gather medical information. The psychological preparation was worse. Marfa received instruction in her duties as Tsarina, delivered by female relatives of previous Tsarina's women who had witnessed what happened to their sisters and daughters and understood exactly what Marfa was being prepared for. The instructions covered behavior in public and private. Walk 3 steps behind Ivan, eyes lowered unless addressed. Speak briefly, softly,
One word of
never
this,
contradicting,
and your
never
lands,
questioning.
your title,
Recognize
and your
signs of approaching rage, know when to withdraw, and when to
This
submit.
is your final
Understand
warning,
that
Marfa.
survival depended on reading
Disgrace
his
us
emotional
again,
state correctly.
and you will regret
The instructions also covered private duties of the marriage bed. Fragments surviving in letters from noblewomen who underwent similar preparation describe training in submission, detailed instruction in how to accept whatever a husband might demand while maintaining the appearance of willing participation. One fragment from 1,543
Tell us where you
states.
hide the letters!
They told us our desires did not matter.
Tear the
Our
floorboards
feelings
up.
were
It
irrelevant.
must be here.
Whatever our husbands wished to do, we must accept with gratitude. They told us resistance was sin against God, who created women to serve men. By the end, I no longer believed I had the right to refuse anything. I had been taught my own soul was worthless compared to my husband's pleasure. The wedding took place the 28th of October, 1571, the most elaborate ceremony Moscow had ever seen. 3 days of festivities costing more than several minor kingdoms' annual revenue. Marfa performed her role flawlessly, spoke
Why you
required
take 'em all
words,
from me?
made required
Why you leave
gestures,
me here alone?
demonstrated required submission.
can't go
When
on,
Ivan
Lord,
led
I
her
just
to the
can't
bridal
go
chamber,
on.
she went without hesitation. Within days of the wedding, Marfa began showing symptoms of illness that royal physicians couldn't explain. The pattern was deliberate. Ivan demanded not merely submission, but enthusiasm, visible, audible evidence that his wife welcomed whatever he chose to do. Mere compliance wasn't
Again!
sufficient.
Put your
The
weight into
Tsarina
it.
had
It's
to
breaking.
perform satisfaction, demonstrate pleasure, convince Ivan she genuinely desired to be used
not
as he
do
wished.
this!
This
For the
created
love of
an
God, let
impossible
me out!
bind.
I
Genuine
have done
pleasure might
nothing!
suggest unchastity, learned responses from prior experience. No pleasure might indicate coldness, failing to appreciate the honor of serving the Tsar. Marfa apparently failed this test within the first week. Court records show Ivan ordered investigations into her background immediately after the
Your
wedding,
name is no longer
re-examining
Alara.
every
From this
aspect
moment,
of
you
her
are
life
Edith.
before Moscow,
Say it.
looking for evidence of prior experience that might explain responses he'd observed. Simultaneously, Marfa began receiving the poison that would kill her. The arsenic and mercury detected by forensic scientists in her bones was administered in repeated low doses over approximately 2 weeks, producing symptoms that matched court medical records: weakness, nausea, trembling, confusion, eventually organ failure. Ivan was poisoning his new wife while investigating whether she'd deceived him about her past. If investigation found evidence of unchastity, poisoning could accelerate to death, attributed to divine judgment. If nothing was found, poison could be adjusted to keep her sick and dependent without killing.